In a city where glass towers pierced the clouds and luxury cars lined the streets, there lived a man named Ethan. He was in his early 30s with sharp features, a confident stride, and an air of superiority that made people either admire or avoid him. Ethan worked as a financial analyst for one of the biggest firms in the city. His job paid him well, very well, and he made sure everyone knew it. From his tailored suits to his expensive wristwatch, Ethan's life was a testament to success. But beneath the polished exterior lay a personality that many found difficult to endure. Ethan wasn't just ambitious, he was opinionated. And not in the casual way most people are. No, Ethan had strong views about nearly everything, and he never hesitated to share them, whether they were welcome or not. One topic he particularly enjoyed debating was religion, or rather the lack of it. Ethan considered himself an atheist, and he took pride in dismissing what he called superstitions and fairy tales. To him, faith was outdated, irrational, and something only weak-minded people clung to. Over time, this belief became more than just a personal conviction. It turned into a weapon he used to mock those who didn't share his perspective. It wasn't uncommon for Ethan to interrupt conversations at work or social gatherings to critique someone's belief system. If a colleague mentioned attending church on Sunday, Ethan would roll his eyes and mutter something sarcastic under his breath. If a friend talked about praying during tough times, Ethan would scoff and say, "Praying won't pay your bills." While some admired his boldness, others found him arrogant and insensitive. Yet no one dared confront him directly because Ethan held significant influence in his professional circle. People feared his sharp tongue and cutting remarks. One sunny afternoon, Ethan decided to take a break from his usual routine of meetings and spreadsheets. He strolled into an upscale cafe located near his office building, a place frequented by corporate elites sipping lattes while discussing mergers and acquisitions. The atmosphere buzzed with ambition, and Ethan felt right at home among these power players. He ordered his usual cappuccino and settled into a corner table, scanning the room with a sense of satisfaction. As Ethan sipped his coffee, he overheard fragments of conversation drifting from a nearby table. Two colleagues from his company were seated there, chatting animatedly. At first, their discussion seemed mundane: work deadlines, weekend plans, and other trivial matters. But then one of them brought up a name that caught Ethan's attention: Keanu Reeves. The actor was a global icon, known not just for his roles in blockbuster movies but also for his humility and kindness off-screen. Many admired him for his down-to-earth nature despite his fame and fortune. The colleague speaking leaned forward, her voice filled with admiration. "Did you know Keanu has always been so close to his mom? Apparently she raised him mostly on her own after his dad left, when he was young. She even battled serious health issues while trying to provide for him. Can you imagine how hard that must have been?" Her companion nodded thoughtfully. "Yeah, I've heard about that too. It's inspiring, really." Despite all the challenges, she managed to give him such strong values. You can see it in how humble and grounded he is today. Ethan listened quietly at first, swirling his coffee absent-mindedly. But as the conversation continued, irritation bubbled within him. Stories like these, the kind that painted struggle as noble or faith-filled perseverance as heroic, always grated on him. To Ethan, they sounded like excuses to romanticize hardship rather than addressing its root causes. Besides, he couldn't understand why anyone would find comfort in believing that suffering somehow led to greater meaning. Unable to contain himself any longer, Ethan set his cup down with a loud clink. Both colleagues turned to look at him, startled by the sudden noise. Without missing a beat, Ethan smirked and said, "Oh, come on, spare me the inspirational speech. Struggling doesn't make you special. Everyone struggles, big deal." His tone dripped with mockery, drawing glances from nearby tables. One of the colleagues frowned, clearly uncomfortable. "Well, I think it's admirable how they stayed close through everything," she replied cautiously. "Admirable?" Ethan shot back, raising an eyebrow. "What's admirable about being unable to handle life properly? Sounds more like incompetence to me. Honestly, if Keanu's mom had half a brain, maybe she wouldn't have ended up in such a mess in the first place." The words hung heavy in the air, silencing the table completely. Even the hum of chatter around the cafe seemed to dim momentarily. Ethan's colleagues exchanged uneasy looks but said nothing further. They knew better than to argue with him. Instead, they quickly changed the subject, steering clear of anything remotely controversial. But Ethan didn't notice, or care, that his comment had made others uneasy. In fact, he felt a strange sense of satisfaction, as though he'd proven some unspoken point. Leaning back in his chair, he crossed his arms smugly, convinced once again that his worldview was superior to everyone else's. Little did Ethan realize, however, that his harsh words would soon come back to haunt him in ways he could never have anticipated. Unbeknownst to him, fate was already setting the stage for an encounter that would challenge everything he thought he knew, not just about others, but about himself. After finishing his coffee, Ethan left the cafe feeling pleased with himself. He always enjoyed moments like these, when he could assert his opinions and leave others speechless. As he walked back toward his office, he decided to take a different route than usual. The main streets were crowded with traffic and pedestrians, so he chose a quieter path through a narrow side street lined with small shops and cafes. It was a part of the city he rarely visited, but today, something about it caught his attention. The side street felt almost like a hidden world compared to the bustling avenues nearby. There were no towering skyscrapers here, just modest buildings, with colorful facades. A bakery emitted the sweet smell of freshly baked bread, while a flower shop displayed vibrant bouquets in its window. Ethan slowed his pace, intrigued by the charm of this unexpected detour. Despite his usual disdain for anything that wasn't sleek or modern, he found himself drawn to the simplicity of the surroundings. As he strolled along, his eyes landed on a small bookstore tucked between a tailor's shop and a tiny art gallery. Its sign read, "Patricia's Pages," in faded gold letters. The store looked old-fashioned, with wooden shelves visible through the glass windows and stacks of books piled haphazardly inside. Something about it made Ethan pause. Perhaps it was curiosity, or maybe boredom, but whatever the reason, he pushed open the door and stepped inside. A bell jingled softly as Ethan entered, announcing his arrival. The interior of the shop was cozy, with warm lighting and the faint scent of paper and ink lingering in the air. Bookshelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling, crammed with novels, biographies, and even some vintage magazines. In the center of the room stood a circular table displaying a selection of bestsellers and classic titles. It was a stark contrast to the sterile, minimalist environments Ethan was accustomed to, but there was an undeniable charm to the place. Behind the counter stood an elderly woman arranging a stack of books. She looked up as Ethan entered, her face breaking into a kind smile. Her hair was streaked with gray and her hands bore the marks of age, but her eyes sparkled with warmth. "Good afternoon," she greeted him cheerfully. "Welcome to Patricia's Pages. Are you looking for anything in particular?" Ethan hesitated for a moment, unsure how to respond. He hadn't planned on buying anything. He'd simply wandered, in out of curiosity. Still, he didn't want to appear rude. "Not really," he replied, glancing around the room. "Just exploring." The woman nodded understandingly. "Well, feel free to look around. If you need help, I'm here." With that, she returned to organizing the books, leaving Ethan to explore on his own. He began wandering through the aisles, running his fingers over the spines of the books. Some titles seemed familiar, while others were completely foreign to him. Ethan wasn't much of a reader. He preferred podcasts and business journals, but he couldn't deny the appeal of the tactile experience. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to imagine what it might be like to lose himself in a story, though he quickly dismissed the thought as impractical. As he reached the far end of the shop, his gaze fell upon a framed photograph hanging on the wall. At first glance, it appeared to be a family portrait, but as Ethan moved closer, he realized one of the figures looked strangely familiar. Standing beside the elderly woman who ran the shop was none other than Keanu Reeves. Ethan blinked in disbelief, leaning in to get a better look. Yes, it was definitely him. The same dark hair, the same gentle expression that had graced countless magazine covers. Ethan's mind raced. Could this really be Keanu's mother? Was this the same woman whose struggles he had mocked earlier that day? The realization hit him like a punch to the gut, and for a moment he froze, unsure of what to do next. His heart pounded as he tried to process the situation. How could he have been so careless, so arrogant? Before he could gather his thoughts, the shopkeeper approached him, noticing his interest in the photograph. "Ah, I see you found our little piece of fame," she said with a chuckle. Her tone was light and friendly, but Ethan felt a wave of panic rising within him. Is that Keanu Reeves?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly despite his attempt to sound casual. The woman smiled proudly. "Yes, indeed, that's my son. I'm Patricia, his mother." Ethan's stomach sank. Here he was, standing face to face with the very person whose life he had ridiculed only hours ago. His mind scrambled for words, but all he managed was a weak, followed by an awkward silence. Patricia, however, didn't seem to notice his discomfort. She continued speaking warmly, sharing anecdotes about the photo and how much her son loved visiting the shop whenever he was in town. Ethan nodded stiffly, forcing a smile as he listened. Inside, though, he was reeling. He wanted to apologize, to explain himself, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he stood there, trapped in a nightmare of his own making, wondering how things could possibly get worse. And then they did. The bell above the door jingled again, signaling another customer's arrival. Ethan turned instinctively, and his blood ran cold. Walking into the shop, dressed casually in jeans and a leather jacket, was Keanu Reeves himself. Keanu stepped inside the bookstore, his presence instantly filling the small space with an aura of calmness and familiarity. He greeted Patricia with a warm hug, his voice soft and genuine as he asked how her day had been. "Hey, Mom," he said, pulling back to look at her. "Everything okay?" Patricia smiled, patting his arm affectionately. "Of course, sweetheart. Just another quiet afternoon here at the shop." She gestured toward Ethan, who stood frozen like a deer caught in headlights. "We have a visitor." This young man was admiring that old photo of us. Ethan's face burned with embarrassment. His mind raced, trying to come up with something, anything to say, but all he could manage was a feeble nod. Keanu turned his attention to Ethan, offering him a polite smile. "Hi there," he said simply, his tone friendly and unassuming. Hi," Ethan stammered, feeling like every word stuck in his throat. He shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to stay or bolt out of the shop. The weight of what he'd said earlier about Keanu's mother pressed down on him like a heavy stone. How could he possibly explain himself without sounding even more foolish? For a moment, silence hung between them. Patricia seemed unfazed by Ethan's awkwardness, continuing their conversation as if nothing unusual were happening. "So, did you bring me anything interesting today?" she teased her son playfully. Keanu chuckled, reaching into his bag and pulling out a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Just a little something I thought you'd enjoy," he replied, handing it to her. Patricia's eyes lit up as she unwrapped it carefully, revealing a first-edition copy of one of her favorite novels. Her delighted laugh echoed through the shop, breaking some of the tension, but not for Ethan. He felt utterly out of place, standing there while this intimate exchange unfolded before him. Every second seemed to stretch longer than the last. Part of him wanted to disappear, to melt into the floorboards and vanish entirely. But another part, a deeper, quieter part, felt compelled to stay. Something about the warmth between Keanu and Patricia tugged at him, stirring emotions he couldn't quite name. Finally, summoning whatever courage he had left, Ethan blurted out, I'm sorry. I said some things earlier today. Things I shouldn't have. About your mom and, well, everything." The words spilled out in a rush, clumsy and raw. His cheeks flushed red as he waited for a reaction. To his surprise, Keanu didn't respond with anger or sarcasm. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, studying Ethan with thoughtful eyes. After a pause, he spoke. "We all make mistakes," he said gently. "What matters is learning from them." Patricia chimed in, her voice steady and kind. And maybe understanding that everyone carries burdens we can't always see. Life isn't easy for anyone, no matter how things might look on the outside. Their words struck a chord deep within Ethan. For years, he had prided himself on being self-reliant, on never showing weakness or vulnerability. Yet here were two people, complete strangers really, who exuded strength not through arrogance or bravado, but through humility and compassion. They weren't angry with him. They weren't mocking him. Instead, they offered grace, a concept Ethan hadn't fully understood until now. Encouraged by their kindness, Ethan dared to ask, Can I ask you something? What was it like growing up the way you did, with everything your mom went through?" The question hung in the air, honest and unguarded. Keanu glanced at Patricia, sharing a silent moment of understanding before turning back to Ethan. "It wasn't perfect," he admitted. "There were hard days when it felt like the world was against us. But my mom taught me something important. Resilience isn't about never falling. It's about getting back up no matter how many times life knocks you down." Patricia nodded, adding, "And love. Love makes all the difference. Knowing someone believes in you even when you don't believe in yourself. That keeps you going." Ethan listened intently, his chest tightening with emotion. These weren't the kinds of lessons he learned in boardrooms or networking events. This was wisdom born from experience, from real-life struggles and triumphs. As he absorbed their words, he realized something profound. His own life, for all its success and luxury, lacked depth. He had built walls around himself, convinced that vulnerability was weakness. But standing here, surrounded by books and stories, he began to see that true strength came from connection, from acknowledging pain and finding meaning in it. Time slipped away unnoticed as Ethan stayed in the shop, listening to Patricia and Keanu share more about their lives. They spoke of challenges faced and overcome, of moments of joy amid hardship, and of the importance of treating others with kindness. Each story painted a picture of humanity far richer and more complex than Ethan had ever allowed himself to imagine. By the time he finally left the bookstore, the sun was beginning to set, casting golden light across the city streets. Ethan walked slowly, his mind swirling with thoughts and emotions. He felt lighter somehow, as though a weight he hadn't even realized he carried had been lifted. Though he knew he couldn't undo the careless words he'd spoken earlier, he vowed to change, to approach life differently moving forward. As he passed the spot where he'd mocked Keanu's family just hours ago, Ethan paused. He looked around at the bustling cafe, the busy professionals chatting over coffee, and the endless stream of cars flowing past. For the first time, he saw it all through new eyes, not as symbols of power or status, but as reminders of shared humanity. Everyone had a story, whether visible or hidden, and each deserved respect and understanding. With a deep breath, Ethan continued walking, carrying with him not just guilt and regret, but also hope. Hope that he could become someone better, someone kinder, someone willing to listen instead of judge. And though he knew the journey ahead wouldn't be easy, he felt ready, for the first time in a long time, to truly grow. The days that followed Ethan's encounter at Patricia's pages were unlike any he had experienced before. At first, he tried to return to his usual routine, waking up early, heading to the office, attending meetings, and crunching numbers. But no matter how hard he focused on spreadsheets or financial reports, his mind kept drifting back to the bookstore. The memory of Keanu's calm demeanor and Patricia's gentle wisdom lingered in his thoughts, refusing to fade. Ethan began, noticing things he had overlooked before. During lunch breaks, when colleagues discussed their weekend plans or shared stories about their families, he found himself listening more closely instead of interrupting with sarcastic remarks. He realized how often people spoke about struggles. They faced health issues, financial worries, relationship problems, and how rarely he acknowledged their pain. Instead, he had dismissed these conversations as complaints or excuses. Now, for the first time, he saw them differently, not as weaknesses, but as glimpses into lives shaped by challenges. One afternoon, as Ethan sat in a meeting room surrounded by his team, something unexpected happened. A junior analyst named Claire hesitated while presenting her report, visibly nervous. In the past, Ethan would have rolled his eyes or made a snide comment under his breath. But this time, he caught himself. Instead of reacting harshly, he leaned forward slightly and said, "Take your time, Claire. We're all here to support you." His words surprised even him, but what surprised him more was the look of gratitude on Claire's face. She finished her presentation confidently, and later, she thanked him privately for his encouragement. Moments like these started happening more frequently. Ethan noticed that small acts of kindness, offering help without being asked, listening attentively, or simply smiling at someone, had a ripple effect. People responded differently to him now. They seemed less intimidated and more open. For years, Ethan had believed respect came from authority and sharpness, but now he saw that true respect was earned through empathy and understanding. Despite these changes, Ethan still carried the weight of what he'd said about Patricia and Keanu. Though they had forgiven him, he couldn't forgive himself so easily. One evening, after a long day at work, he decided to write them a letter. It wasn't something he did lightly. Writing required vulnerability, and vulnerability was something Ethan had always avoided. But he felt compelled to express his gratitude, not just for their forgiveness, but for the lessons they had unknowingly taught him. Sitting at his kitchen table, pen in hand, Ethan began carefully crafting his message. He wrote about how their words had challenged his beliefs and forced him to confront his own arrogance. He admitted his mistakes openly, acknowledging the harm his comments might have caused. And most importantly, he thanked them for showing him the value of compassion and humility. When he sealed the envelope and placed it in his bag, he felt a strange sense of relief, as though he had taken one step closer to becoming the person he wanted to be. A few days later, Ethan received a reply. It was short but heartfelt. Patricia wrote that she appreciated his honesty and encouraged him to keep learning and growing. Keanu added a brief note saying, "We're all works in progress. Keep moving forward." Their response filled Ethan with renewed determination. He knew changing deeply ingrained habits wouldn't happen overnight, but he was committed to trying. As weeks turned into months, Ethan continued making subtle yet meaningful adjustments to his life. He stopped mocking others' beliefs and started asking questions instead. If a coworker mentioned praying for guidance during tough times, Ethan didn't scoff or change the subject. Instead, he asked why prayer mattered to them. These conversations opened doors to perspectives he had never considered before. Slowly, he began to see faith not as a crutch for the weak, but as a source of strength and hope for many. Ethan also sought opportunities to give back to his community. He volunteered at a local shelter serving meals to those in need, an experience that humbled him profoundly. Many of the people he met there had endured hardships far greater than anything he could imagine, yet they greeted him with smiles and gratitude. It reminded him of what Patricia had said, that everyone carries burdens we can't always see. Serving others helped Ethan gain perspective on his own privileges and inspired him to use them wisely. At work, Ethan became known not just for his analytical skills but also for his leadership style. Where once he had demanded perfection and criticized mistakes, he now offered guidance and encouragement. His team thrived under his new approach, producing better results and fostering a stronger sense of camaraderie. Even his superiors noticed the shift, praising him for creating a positive and productive environment. But perhaps the biggest change occurred within Ethan himself. He no longer measured success solely by wealth or status. Instead, he found fulfillment in connections with his colleagues, with strangers he met while volunteering, and even with himself. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to reflect on his emotions, to admit when he felt uncertain or afraid. Vulnerability, he discovered, wasn't weakness. It was courage. One evening, as Ethan walked home from work, he passed the little bookstore again. Patricia's Pages was closed now, its windows dark and empty. Patricia had retired recently, choosing to spend more time with her family. Though the shop was gone, its impact remained vivid in Ethan's memory. Each time he passed by, he thought about the lessons he'd learned there, the importance of kindness, the power of forgiveness, and the beauty of human connection. That night, as Ethan stood on his balcony overlooking the city skyline, he reflected on how much his life had changed since that fateful day. He thought about the man he used to be, the one who mocked others' beliefs and dismissed their struggles, and compared him to the man he was becoming. There was still work to do, of course. Growth was a lifelong journey, not a destination. But Ethan felt hopeful. Hopeful that he could continue evolving. Hopeful that he could make amends for past mistakes. And hopeful that he could live a life defined not by arrogance, but by compassion. And as he gazed out at the glittering lights of the city below, Ethan realized something profound. True luxury wasn't found in expensive suits or penthouse views. True luxury was the ability to connect with others, to understand their pain, and to offer kindness in return. It was the willingness to grow, to learn, and to become someone better. And for the first time in his life, Ethan felt genuinely rich. Months had passed since Ethan's transformative encounter at Patricia's pages, and the changes in his life continued to unfold in ways both subtle and profound. The man who once prided himself on cutting remarks and dismissive attitudes was now someone entirely different, someone who sought connection rather than conflict, understanding instead of judgment. Yet despite the progress he'd made, Ethan knew there was still more work to be done. He often reminded himself that growth wasn't a destination, it was an ongoing journey. One crisp autumn morning, as Ethan prepared for another day at the office, he received an email that caught him off guard. It was from Keanu Reeves. At first, Ethan thought it might be spam or some kind of prank, but when he opened the message, he recognized Keanu's warm and humble tone immediately. In the email, Keanu thanked Ethan for his earlier letter and invited him to join him and Patricia for dinner the following weekend. They wanted to catch up and hear more about how Ethan's journey was progressing. Ethan stared at the screen, stunned. Invitations like this weren't part of his usual world. He rarely socialized outside of work events, let alone shared meals with celebrities and their families. For a moment, doubt crept in. Was he worthy of such kindness? Could he hold his own in a conversation without saying something awkward or offensive? But then he remembered Keanu's words from their first meeting. What matters is learning from our mistakes. Taking a deep breath, Ethan replied, accepting the invitation with gratitude. The weekend arrived quickly, and Ethan found himself standing nervously outside Patricia's home, a modest house nestled in a quiet neighborhood. Unlike the sleek high-rises and luxury condos Ethan was accustomed to, this place exuded warmth and simplicity. Flowers bloomed in the garden, and the scent of fresh herbs wafted through the air. Before he could knock, the door swung open, revealing Patricia with a wide smile. "Ethan, welcome," she said, ushering him inside. Her voice carried the same warmth he remembered from the bookstore, putting him at ease almost instantly. As he stepped into the living room, Keanu appeared from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel. "Hey, glad you could make it," he said, extending a hand. Ethan shook it firmly, marveling at how grounded Keanu seemed despite his fame. Dinner was a casual affair, filled with laughter and stories. Patricia recounted amusing anecdotes from Keanu's childhood, while Keanu teased her good-naturedly about her cooking experiments gone wrong. Ethan listened intently, finding joy in their playful banter. When they asked him about his recent experiences, he hesitated at first, unsure how much to share. But encouraged by their genuine interest, he opened up about the changes he'd made in his life, how he'd started volunteering, reevaluating his priorities, and striving to treat others with greater empathy. Patricia nodded approvingly. "It takes courage to change, Ethan. Not everyone would admit their faults, let alone try to fix them," Keanu added. "And it's not always easy. Sometimes people won't understand why you're doing things differently, but if it feels right to you, that's what matters." Their words resonated deeply with Ethan. For so long, he had lived according to external expectations, chasing promotions, accumulating wealth, seeking approval from peers. Now, guided by the lessons he'd learned, he was beginning to define success on his own terms. Success wasn't about impressing others anymore. It was about living authentically and contributing positively to the world around him. As dessert was served, a rich chocolate cake baked by Patricia, conversation turned to the topic of resilience. Ethan admitted that one of the hardest parts of his transformation had been facing criticism. Some colleagues mocked his newfound focus on kindness, accusing him of being soft or insincere. Others questioned whether his actions were merely a phase. "I guess I didn't realize how much resistance I'd face," Ethan confessed. "It made me wonder if I was doing the right thing." Patricia leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. "Change is never easy, for you or for those watching you change. People are used to seeing you a certain way, and when you start acting differently, it challenges their perception of you. That doesn't mean you should stop, though. Keep going. Over time, they'll see the real you," Keanu agreed. "Authenticity has a way of shining through eventually. Trust yourself, Ethan. If your heart tells you something is worth doing, then it is." Their advice stayed with Ethan long after the evening ended. On the drive home, he reflected on the dinner and the bond he felt with Patricia and Keanu. Though they came from vastly different worlds, their shared humanity bridged the gap between them. They had welcomed him into their lives not because they owed him anything, but because they believed in second chances and the power of redemption. In the weeks that followed, Ethan continued embracing his new path with renewed determination. He reached out to old acquaintances he had alienated with his sharp tongue, apologizing sincerely and rebuilding relationships. To his surprise, many forgave him readily, expressing admiration for his willingness to change. One former colleague even invited him to join a community service project, which introduced Ethan to a network of like-minded individuals passionate about making a difference. Through these connections, Ethan discovered a sense of purpose he had never known before. Volunteering at the shelter evolved into mentoring young adults transitioning out of foster care. He helped them write resumes, practice interview skills, and navigate the challenges of adulthood. Seeing their determination inspired him to push harder in his own life, knowing that his efforts could create opportunities for others. At work, Ethan championed initiatives aimed at fostering inclusivity and support within the company. He proposed workshops on emotional intelligence and conflict resolution, encouraging employees to prioritize collaboration over competition. His ideas gained traction, earning praise from leadership and transforming the workplace culture. Despite these accomplishments, Ethan remained humble. He understood that growth required constant effort and vigilance. There were still moments when old habits threatened to resurface, when frustration bubbled over during stressful meetings or impatience crept into his tone. But each time, he paused, took a breath, and reminded himself of the lessons he'd learned. Progress wasn't perfection, it was persistence. One evening, as Ethan sat on his balcony watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, he felt a deep sense of peace. The city below buzzed with activity, yet he felt grounded, connected to something larger than himself. He thought about Patricia and Keanu, whose kindness had sparked his transformation, and silently thanked them for believing in him when he struggled to believe in himself. Ethan realized that life, like the skyline before him, was full of peaks and valleys. Challenges would always arise, testing his resolve, but armed with compassion, humility, and a commitment to growth, he felt ready to face whatever lay ahead. For the first time, he understood that true fulfillment came not from achieving goals or acquiring possessions, but from living a life rooted in meaning and connection. And as darkness fell over the city, Ethan smiled, knowing he was exactly where he was meant to be, on a journey toward becoming the best version of himself. As the months rolled on, Ethan's transformation became more than just a personal journey. It began to ripple outward, touching the lives of those around him. His newfound approach to life wasn't just about avoiding harsh words or offering polite smiles. It was about actively seeking opportunities to make a difference, whether at work, in his community, or within his circle of friends. Ethan found ways to spread kindness and understanding, What surprised him most was how these small acts seemed to multiply, creating waves of positivity far beyond what he had imagined. One day, as Ethan walked through the bustling streets of the city during his lunch break, he noticed a young woman sitting on a bench near the park. She looked tired, her shoulders slumped under the weight of an overstuffed backpack. Beside her sat a cardboard sign that read, "Need help to get back on my feet." Ethan paused, feeling a tug in his chest. In the past, he might have walked by without a second thought, dismissing her situation as someone else's problem. But now, something inside him wouldn't let him ignore her. Approaching cautiously, Ethan greeted her with a warm smile. "Hi there," he said gently. "Is there anything I can do to help?" The woman looked up, startled but guarded. After a moment, she nodded hesitantly. "I'm trying to save enough for a bus ticket home," she explained quietly. "Things haven't been going well here." Ethan listened intently, asking questions and learning about her story. Her name was Maria, and she had come to the city hoping to find work after losing her job in another state. Instead, she found herself struggling to survive. Moved by her courage and determination, Ethan offered not only money for the bus ticket, but also connected her with resources he knew could provide further assistance. By the end of their conversation, Maria's eyes sparkled with renewed hope, a sight that filled Ethan with quiet satisfaction. This interaction reminded Ethan of a lesson Patricia had shared months earlier. Everyone carries burdens we can't always see. It wasn't enough to simply notice people's struggles. True compassion required action. From that day forward, Ethan made it a habit to carry snacks, water bottles, and even prepaid transit cards in his bag, ready to offer help whenever he encountered someone in need. At work, Ethan's influence continued to grow. He had become known not just as a skilled analyst, but as a mentor and advocate for his colleagues. When Claire, the same junior analyst whose presentation he had encouraged months ago, was promoted to lead a major project, Ethan celebrated her success as if it were his own. He took time to guide her through the challenges of leadership, sharing insights he had gained along the way. Under his support, Claire flourished, earning recognition from higher-ups and inspiring others on the team to step up. But perhaps the most significant change occurred within Ethan's inner circle. Friends who once avoided him due to his sharp tongue now sought him out for advice and companionship. One evening, over dinner with a group of old acquaintances, Ethan shared stories of his journey, the mistakes he had made, the lessons he had learned, and the people who had helped him grow. His honesty struck a chord with those around him, sparking heartfelt conversations about their own struggles and aspirations. For the first time, Ethan felt truly connected to the people in his life, not as a figure of authority or intimidation, but as a friend and ally. Despite all the progress he had made, there were still moments when doubt crept in. Late at night, lying awake in bed, Ethan sometimes wondered if he was doing enough. The world was vast, and its problems overwhelming. How could one person possibly make a dent in such immense suffering? Yet each time these thoughts surfaced, he remembered Keanu's words, "We're all works in progress. Keep moving forward." Those simple sentences carried profound meaning, reminding Ethan that every effort mattered, no matter how small. One winter evening, as snow blanketed the city in a soft, shimmering layer, Ethan received an unexpected phone call. It was Patricia. Her voice was cheerful yet tinged with excitement. "Ethan, I wanted to let you know something special," she began. "Keanu and I have decided to start a foundation aimed at supporting single parents facing health challenges. We'd love for you to join us." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. Join them? Him? A man who had once mocked their struggles? The invitation felt like both an honor and a responsibility, one he wasn't sure he deserved. But Patricia assured him otherwise. "You've already shown so much growth and compassion," she said. "Your perspective would be invaluable to our mission." Humbled and inspired, Ethan accepted wholeheartedly. Over the following weeks, he threw himself into planning sessions, brainstorming ideas, and connecting with organizations that aligned with the foundation's goals. Together, they launched programs providing financial aid, counseling services, and educational resources to families in need. Watching the impact unfold firsthand reinforced Ethan's belief in the power of collective action. One person alone couldn't solve every problem, but together, they could create meaningful change. As spring returned to the city, painting the streets with vibrant blooms, Ethan reflected on how far he had come. Gone was the arrogant, dismissive man who measured success by wealth and status. In his place stood someone defined by empathy, resilience, and purpose. He no longer craved luxury cars or designer suits. Instead, he cherished moments of connection, whether mentoring a young adult, volunteering at the shelter, or simply sharing laughter with friends. On a crisp Saturday morning, Ethan visited the site where Patricia's pages once stood. Though the bookstore was gone, replaced by a cozy cafe, the memories lingered vividly in his mind. Standing there, he whispered a silent thank you to Patricia and Keanu for changing his life in ways he never thought possible. Their kindness had taught him that everyone deserves a second chance, and that the greatest luxury in life is the ability to grow, to learn, and to give back. Later that afternoon, Ethan attended a charity gala hosted by the foundation. As he mingled with guests, sharing stories of the work they had accomplished, he spotted Keanu across the room. Catching his eye, Keanu raised his glass in a subtle toast. Ethan smiled, raising his own glass in response. No words were needed. The gesture spoke volumes. That night, as Ethan returned home and gazed out at the glittering city skyline, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Life, he realized, wasn't about avoiding challenges or striving for perfection. It was about embracing imperfection, learning from mistakes, and finding beauty in the connections we forge along the way. And though the road ahead would undoubtedly bring new obstacles, Ethan faced it with unwavering resolve. For the first time in his life, he understood what it meant to live authentically and to do so with an open heart.